The ship had no name that anyone could agree on. Different species called it different things. The Vethari called it the Mouth. The Drezan called it the Empty God. The Sorn Collective had a word for it in their shared language that translated roughly to the thing that should not be looked at directly. Most species with any real knowledge of galactic history knew exactly what it was, where it was, and why nobody went near it. The ones who didn't know found out fast, usually from an elder who sat them down with a serious face and explained things in the tone people use when they are not exaggerating. It floated at the edge of the Raylan cluster, a region of dead stars and cold rock near the outer boundary of the mapped galaxy. The cluster itself was not particularly dangerous. Ships passed through it on trade routes without much trouble. The rocks were easy to navigate around, and the dead stars gave off nothing worth worrying about. The whole region was quiet and dark and completely unremarkable in every way. Except for the ship, it had been there for over 400 years. Nobody knew who had built it. Nobody knew how old it was before anyone found it. Nobody knew what it was for, where it had come from, or what it was waiting for. What everyone did know was short and simple, and had been in every galactic safety briefing for 300 years. Every species that had tried to board it had died. All of them, without exception. The Drezan had been first. 391 years ago, a team of 12 of their finest engineers had gone out in a sealed boarding craft to study the ship. The Drezan were not reckless people. They were careful, patient, and methodical. They had mapped 17 star systems without a single crew loss. They went slowly, with full sensor sweeps, with every safety measure in place. Their boarding craft reached the hull of the ship and touched its surface. One transmission came back, a long rising tone. No words. Just that single sound climbing higher and higher for 4 seconds. Then silence. The craft was never found. The engineers were never found. The only evidence that they had been there at all was a scorch mark on the hull of the big ship, faint and about 1 meter across, shaped vaguely like a hand reaching out. 40 years later, the Kethari tried. The Kethari were not engineers, and they were not patient. They were warriors, tall and four-armed, with clay-gray skin and eyes set too wide on their faces for most other species to look at comfortably. They had conquered 11 systems in a century and had a simple approach to things they wanted. Take them. They sent 400 soldiers in 5 heavy assault craft, with equipment large enough to cut open the hull of a small moon, and they broadcast the whole operation live, so that every species in the sector could watch them take the unclaimed ship. The Kethari Grand Commander made a speech before the fleet departed. It was recorded and filed, and later studied by historians for what it revealed about Kethari overconfidence. Every species in the sector watched the broadcast. When the 5 assault craft reached 500 meters from the hull, they all stopped working. Not explosions. Not a beam weapon or a missile strike. They simply stopped. Life support, engines, backup systems, emergency manual overrides. All of it went dark and silent in under 3 seconds. The 5 craft drifted there for 2 days before a recovery team got close enough to attach cables and pull them back. Inside, they found 400 soldiers, all dead, all sitting in their seats with their hands resting in their laps. No burns, no wounds, no sign of anything that should have killed them. But every single one of the 400 had the same expression on their face. The Kethari did not frighten easily. They had built an entire culture around pain tolerance and the suppression of fear. But every one of those soldiers looked afraid, not surprised, not confused, deeply, completely, utterly afraid. The xenobiologists and researchers who studied the footage argued about interpretations for decades, but there was no real disagreement about what they were seeing. Something had frightened 400 trained Kethari warriors to death without laying a hand on them. The galaxy noted this, updated its star charts, put a warning symbol next to the ship's coordinates, and mostly agreed by unspoken consent to stop discussing it in public settings. The ship acquired the informal name The Condemned, which appeared first in a small courier company's internal route warnings and then spread across navigation databases the way these things always did. Not officially, not by anyone's decision, just quietly and thoroughly until no one could remember calling it anything else. Do not approach. Highly dangerous. Cause unknown. Over the following 3 centuries, 9 more attempts were made. Not all by warriors. The Velhari were diplomats by nature. They believed, genuinely and without cynicism, that any intelligence capable of building something that large and surviving that long could be reasoned with. They sent a small vessel carrying 3 of their most respected speakers, bearing what their culture considered meaningful gifts, broadcasting greetings in 47 languages on rotating frequencies. The ship reached the edge of the Condemned's effective range. Then, like everything before it, it went dark. The Velhari did not send a second mission. They held a memorial ceremony for their 3 speakers and quietly removed the condemned from their list of future diplomatic contacts. The Sorn Collective, which was not one species but 6 networked together, sent automated probes rather than crew. The probes lasted longer than anything else had managed. They transmitted data back to the collective for almost 11 minutes. The data they sent was studied and debated for 100 years. It showed, among other things, that the interior of the ship was pressurized, that it contained a breathable atmosphere compatible with most known species, and that somewhere inside, something was moving. The Sorn never found out what was moving. Their probes went silent and were never seen again. The Cathari tried a second time 80 years after their first attempt, this time with 1,200 soldiers and significantly improved technology. The outcome was the same. All of them sitting, quiet, afraid. After that, the Galactic Council formally classified the condemned as a restricted zone, which was their way of saying the problem was larger than their current solutions, and they hoped it would eventually become someone else's concern. Captain Elena Voss was 34 years old, compact and sharp-featured. With short brown hair she cut herself and a habit of standing with her arms crossed that her crew had quietly named the Wall. She commanded the SS Resolute, a mid-class survey and salvage vessel out of the Kepler station network. The Resolute was not a warship. It had 2 light defensive cannons, an engine that Marcus said was fine and that Voss privately considered held together by stubbornness and habit, and a crew of 11 people who had all, for various reasons they rarely discussed in detail, decided that working on the edge of explored space suited them better than whatever they had been doing before. She found out about the condemned on the 3rd day of a routine mapping job in the Tarsus Belt, when her first officer, Dak Reeves, sat down across from her in the common room and placed a data chip on the table without saying anything. She looked at it. She looked at him. "You're going to want to read it," he said. She picked it up and read it. It was a Galactic Council priority alert, flagged at level 4, marked for senior commanders of member species only. The Cathari had made a 3rd attempt on the condemned, 1,200 soldiers, 3 full assault wings, an especially engineered AI-piloted Lade craft designed to reach the hull before any defensive systems could respond. The AI craft had apparently gotten within 50 meters. Its sensors had actually recorded contact with the hull surface. Then all 1,200 soldiers and every craft in the fleet had done exactly what the others had done before them. They sat down. They went quiet. They died afraid. The alert was not about the deaths. It was about what happened after them. After the Cathari fleet went dark, the long-range probes monitoring the restricted zone recorded the condemned moving for the first time in its 400 years of documented history. It rotated on its axis, slowly and deliberately, by approximately 17 degrees. The rotation stopped when its forward section was aimed clearly and unambiguously at the inner systems, at inhabited space, at the core worlds where billions of people lived their lives. Voss read the alert twice. She looked at the star chart on the wall panel. The Ralland cluster was a small shaded region near the outer edge of the mapped zone. Their current position was 4 light days away. "Every species that tried," she said. "Dead," Dax said. She was quiet. From somewhere deep in the ship, she could hear Marcus banging something with a wrench, a sound she had come to associate with the ship being both broken and fine simultaneously, which was most of its operating life. "Plot a course," she said. Dak reached into his pocket and put a second chip on the table. "Already done," he said. "About 2 hours before I brought you the first one." She looked at the chip. At him. "You waited. I wanted to see if you'd say it without me asking," he said. For my own peace of mind, she picked up the second chip. "Get everyone in the main bay." 1 hour, she told them everything. She stood at the front of the main bay while all 10 crew members sat on equipment crates and folding chairs, and she put the full picture on the display screen behind her. The 400-year history of the condemned, every species, every death, every data point the Sorn probes had sent back, the council alert, the ship's movement. She used plain language, and she used the word dangerous, and she used the word died, and she did not smooth anything over or reframe anything to make it sound manageable. It was not manageable. She had no plan yet, she was going anyway. Then she told them the course was already plotted, and that anyone who wanted off could say so now. With full contract payment, no record kept, no explanation required, and she would arrange a transfer to the nearest station without a word said to anyone. 10 seconds of silence. Marcus Webb raised his hand. He was 47, broad-shouldered, with a gray-streaked beard and the permanent squint of someone who had spent too many years working in bad light. He had lost 2 fingers on a salvage job years ago and never talked about it. He said, What's the plan when we get there? Still working on it, Voss said. He nodded satisfied and put his hand down. Yaramos said, every species that tried went in the same way, military force or technology. All of them trying to take the ship by overwhelming it. Yes, Voss said. Nobody tried anything else? The Velhari tried diplomacy, Dak said. Still died. But they went with an agenda, still trying to get something. Still trying to make the ship give them what they wanted. The room was quiet with the kind of quiet that means thinking. I keep coming back to that too, Voss said. Rin Chen, the pilot, was at the back with her arms crossed, and her expression completely unreadable, which was how her face looked most of the time. She said, it moved after the last attack, pointed toward inhabited systems. She paused. So, sounds like something that's tired of being bothered. Or testing a reaction, Dak said. Testing what? Brant Cole said. Brant was the security officer, the loudest person on board, and had a reliable talent for saying exactly what everyone else was thinking but hadn't yet spoken. No one answered. Not because the question was bad, because the answers were still forming. Course is 4 light days, 3 days at current speed, Voss said. Anyone off? Silence. Brant raised his hand. Voss looked at him. I'm not getting off, he said. I just want it formally noted that this is completely insane and I want that on the record. Noted, Voss said. Now let me have that crate, I need to sit down. The Resolute changed course. The engines pushed and the Tarsus belt fell behind them, and ahead, 4 light days out, was the dim edge of the Rallon cluster, and something ancient and dark waiting inside it. Within 6 hours of changing course, they received 11 separate transmission warnings from 8 different species. Formal advisories, urgent requests, and what one crew member accurately described as outright begging. Every message said the same thing in different languages. Turn back. Voss drafted one reply and sent it to all 11 simultaneously. It said, thank you for your concern. We are a registered survey vessel operating in uncontrolled space. We will maintain communication throughout our approach and do not anticipate requiring assistance. The responses to that were more alarmed than the original warnings. She stopped reading them. On the second day, Dak came to her quarters late and stood in the doorway. 14 long-range probes tracking us now, he said. 6 different species watching. Good, she said. If something happens, at least someone will know where we were. He leaned against the doorframe. Are you scared? She looked at her cold coffee. Yes, she said. You? Since I plotted the course, he said. Same reason you ordered it, I think. Something's been out there 400 years and nobody knows what it wants. And it moved. For the first time in 3 centuries, it moved. He paused. And it didn't move toward the Cathari home system. Didn't move toward the council. Moved toward the inner systems. Toward the youngest species in the galaxy. Voss looked at him. We're the newest ones here, she said quietly. The most recently arrived. And the first thing the Condemned does after 300 years of sitting still is move. Right when humans start appearing in the outer sectors. Dak was quiet for a moment. Could be coincidence, he said. Could be, she said. Neither of them believed that. On the morning of the 3rd day, Rin's voice came over the internal comm. Careful, controlled, a fraction slower than usual. Captain, you should come up here. Voss came up. On the long-range display, close enough now to be a shape rather than a point, was the Condemned. Even at this distance, through sensors and cameras, it looked wrong in a way that was difficult to explain. Not wrong like something broken. Wrong like something that existed at a slightly different angle from everything around it. As if the space it sat in followed slightly different rules than the rest of the cluster. Look at the probe data, Rin said with the same careful steadiness. Voss looked. The Condemned had rotated again. The probes had tracked it and calculated the new heading and cross-referenced it with their navigation data. It was pointing directly at the Resolute. It had been pointing at them for 6 hours, since approximately the time they had stopped reading the warning transmissions. Brant appeared in the bridge doorway holding a protein bar. He looked at the display. He chewed slowly. Then he said, without much conviction, cool. He went back to finish eating. Voss stood at the display and looked at the dark shape ahead of them, massive and patient and watching. And she thought about 12 Drazon engineers, and about 400 soldiers sitting quiet and afraid, and she thought about the Velhari with their gifts and their 47 languages. And she thought about Yara saying, nobody tried anything else. All right, she said to the ship on the screen, to the empty bridge, to herself. Let's find out what you want. They crossed into the outer edge of the Rallon cluster on the morning of the 3rd day. And nobody had slept well the night before. That was not unusual before a difficult job. Voss had seen it 100 times. Alert crews got restless before hard work. They double-checked things that didn't need checking, ate more than they needed to. had conversations that started about ordinary things and ended in long silences. It meant the crew was paying attention. The ones who weren't restless before a dangerous job were the ones she worried about. But this was different from ordinary pre-mission tension, and everyone felt it. The equipment checks were longer. The silences were deeper. 3 separate crew members told Rin Chen separately that they were not scared, which meant all 3 of them were scared and couldn't say so directly without it feeling like failure. Rin told Voss this over coffee at 4 in the morning, when the common room was empty and the Resolute ran on its night cycle lighting, everything dimmer and quieter. "I know," Voss said. "They'll do their jobs," Rin said. "Fear's fine as long as it stays in the feet and out of the hands." "I know," Voss said again. Rin wrapped both hands around her mug and studied the star chart on the small panel above the galley window. The Condemned was a labeled point on it now, close enough to have its own marker, its own symbol. The symbol the navigation database used was a small red diamond, which meant hazard of unknown type, which was the database's polite way of saying we have no category for this. "Do you think it knew about us before it moved?" Rin asked. Voss had been turning that question over for 3 days. "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe it moved for a completely different reason, and we're seeing a pattern that isn't there." "The pattern's there," Rin said simply. "It pointed at us specifically, out of everything in the sector. That's not coincidence." "Then yes," Voss said. "It knew." "Then why us?" Rin asked. "There are hundreds of human ships operating in the outer sectors now. Why the Resolute?" Voss looked at her coffee. She didn't have an answer. She had been looking for one for 72 hours and she still didn't have one. The Resolute was not special. It was a middle-class survey ship with a good but not exceptional crew, an engine held together largely by Marcus's personal refusal to accept malfunction, and a record of solid but unspectacular work across 12 years of service. There was no logical reason for an ancient and apparently lethal ship of unknown origin to single them out from the dark, but it had. "Get a few hours," Voss told her. "I need you sharp on the approach." They reached what everyone had begun calling the outer perimeter at 11 in the morning. The outer perimeter was not a marked line. It was the distance at which every previous expedition's instruments had begun behaving strangely. Sensors giving contradictory readings, navigation computers briefly losing their reference points, communications picking up static that had no identifiable source. It was the zone where ships started feeling wrong to their crews, and people started wanting to leave without being quite able to explain why they wanted to. The Resolute crossed into it, and Marcus said, "Huh," from the engineering console. "Talk to me," Voss said. "The engine's fine," Marcus said, not looking up, "but the efficiency reading is wrong. It's showing 12% better performance than it should be getting, which isn't possible without someone doing maintenance I don't know about." He ran his hand along the edge of the console. "And I'd know about it." "Sensor error," Dak offered. "It's not a sensor error," Marcus said. He put his palm flat on the console panel and held it there. "I can hear it. She's running clean. Really clean. Like something went through the entire system and smoothed it out." He looked up, and his expression was the specific expression of a man who has encountered something he cannot explain, and has decided to document it rather than argue with it. "Nobody went through my engine." Voss looked at the main display. The Condemned was ahead of them, visible now not just as a sensor reading but as a shape. Even on the display screens, even through the cameras and sensor arrays, it was a thing that took up attention in a way that normal objects didn't. It was massive. 3 kilometers long, Dak had confirmed from the probe data, which meant that moving along its side would be like sailing the Resolute along the wall of a large building, covered in overlapping plates of dark metal that caught no light and gave none back. No visible lights anywhere on its surface. No running signals. No windows or ports that looked like anything a builder of ships would put there for a purpose. Nothing that moved or blinked or indicated anything, but it was aimed at them. Its forward section, a broad curved face of layered plating that looked from the right angle like a closed eye, was pointed directly at the Resolute. At them specifically, in all the dark space of the cluster, as if it had been waiting in exactly this position for a reason. "Weapons are offline," Brandt reported from his station. Voss looked at him. "Our weapons," he confirmed. "Both cannons. The system shows them ready. When I try to power them up, nothing happens. No error code, no fault signal. They just don't power up." Voss thought about the Cathari assault craft going dark in 3 seconds. She thought about 400 trained soldiers sitting with their hands in their laps. "Don't force it," she said. "Leave them exactly where they are." Brandt looked at the display for a moment. Then he looked at Voss with an expression that contained both reluctance and trust, which was the combination she valued most in a security officer. He nodded. Leaving them offline, he said. The internal communications screen on the bridge flickered. Then all four of the secondary displays showed the same thing at the same moment. A line of text in a language none of them recognized. White characters on black, scrolling slowly from right to left. The characters were not like anything in the navigation database's known languages index. They looked structured, like language, like something that meant specific things in sequence. But no trained eye on the ship could read them. The scroll lasted 8 seconds, and then every display returned to normal. Was that a message? Yaramos was standing in the bridge doorway, having come up from the medical bay. Her stylus was in her hand, and the end of it had clearly been chewed. I've sent it to the translation database, Dax said, recording everything. Could take a while. Could take a very long while if it matches any known language at all. Log it and keep moving, Voss said. Rin kept them on a slow, steady approach. Not hesitant, not aggressive. Deliberate, like a person walking towards something large and uncertain, and choosing to do it with their chin up. Voss had picked the speed carefully because it looked like neither fear nor hostility, though she was aware the ship ahead of them could probably read whatever it wanted into their behavior regardless. At 300 meters from the hull, she said, "Stop here." Rin stopped them. The condemned filled most of the front viewport. At this range, the true scale of it was almost impossible to hold in the mind. Each of the overlapping metal plates on the hull was larger than the Resolute. The plates layered over each other in a pattern that repeated, but was never quite identical, like the scales of something biological that had grown rather than been built. The surface was not smooth. There were lines and grooves, markings of different depths, some that looked manufactured and deliberate, and some that looked like old damage, old scars from things that had happened a very long time ago. The metal had color in it that the cameras caught better than the human eye. Deep veins of blue-green running through the dark gray, iridescent and cold, visible only at certain angles, like the inside of certain shells. "It's beautiful," Yara said very quietly. Nobody disagreed with that. "No visible entry anywhere. In the forward section," Dax said, scanning steadily. "No airlock, no docking collar, no hatch of any kind that we'd recognize as such. If there's a way in, it doesn't look like a door." "The Drazon scorch mark," Voss said. 700 meters back along the port side, Dax confirmed. "Still there. Can we reach it?" "Yes. Then that's where we go." Rin moved them slowly along the hull. The Resolute traveled the length of a wall that went on and on, the markings scrolling past, the iridescent lines deep in the metal catching the light from the distant cluster stars. Nobody spoke on the bridge. There was no particular reason for silence, but silence felt appropriate and nobody broke it. The scorch mark was exactly where the record said it would be. About 1 meter across, rough at the edges, shaped so clearly like a reaching hand that Voss felt something move through her chest when she saw it. Not quite dread. Something older than dread. "Right there," she said. Marcus was already running scans. "Hull reads the same as everywhere else," he said. "No opening, no structural weakness, no difference in composition." He paused. He ran the scan again. "But there's a heat differential. This section is about 3 degrees warmer than the surrounding hull. Steady. The warmth is coming from inside the ship." "Like something living," Yara said. "Like something that generates its own heat," Marcus said carefully. The distinction between the two things was there in his voice, but he wasn't pushing it. Voss looked at the scorch mark for a long time. The Drazon team had put their hand on the hull and died. But something had made that mark. Something had reached from inside the ship toward the surface. Or toward something outside it. The mark was shaped like a reaching hand. Not a burn pattern, not a mechanical impression, a hand reaching out. "I'm going outside," Voss said. "Captain," Dax said. "I'm not taking any equipment for forcing entry," she said. "I'm not going in. I'm going to walk up to the hull and put my hand on it. That's the only thing I'm going to do." "That's also roughly what 12 Drazon engineers did," Brandt said. "They had plasma cutters large enough to cut through the hull," Voss said. "They were there to force it open. I'm not doing that." She looked at the scorch mark on the display. "I'm just going to say hello." Brandt looked at her for a long moment with the expression of a man who thinks the plan is dangerous but has decided to support it anyway, because something about it makes sense to him, even if he can't fully say what. He said, "I'll get your suit." She went out alone. She had insisted on that part. If the ship was going to do something to the first person who touched it, she was not going to let it do it to 2 people at once when she could prevent that. She suited up in the airlock, ran all her checks twice, and stepped out through the outer door into the cold black of the cluster. The hull was right in front of her, huge and dark and close, and the faint iridescent veins in the metal caught the dim light of the distant stars. She activated her maneuvering thrusters and moved toward the scorch mark. She reached out. She pressed her palm flat against the hull. It was warm. Not the warmth of metal that has been sitting near a heat source. Warm from the inside, steady and constant. That specific quality of warmth that only comes from something generating its own heat. From some internal process that does not stop. She had felt it before once, pressing her hand against the hull of a pressurized habitat after a power failure to check if the heating core was still running. That same quality. That same certainty of something alive, or at minimum, something continuously active on the other side. She held her hand there. 30 seconds. A minute. Nothing happened to her. No systems failed, her suit held, her readings were normal. No sound, no signal, no attack. She moved her hand slightly and pressed it still again. The hull vibrated. Just once, gentle low, like a single deep breath taken by something very large and very slow. A pulse almost. Then 3 meters to her right, the hull opened. Not fast, not violently. Smoothly the way a hand opens when it is not making a fist. Several overlapping plates shifted and slid away from each other, folding back into the surrounding hull with a sound her helmet mic picked up as a sustained low tone. One steady note, resonant, unlike anything she had heard before. The opening that appeared was roughly 2 meters tall and 1.5 meters wide. It was dark inside, but not completely dark. From somewhere deeper in, a faint blue-gray light pulsed slowly and steadily, regular as breathing. Voss looked at it. She looked back at the Resolute, small and solid 50 meters away, and she knew her crew was watching every second of this on the camera feed. She pressed her comm. "I found the door," she said. A short silence. Then Marcus said, in a voice of very deliberate calm, "Of course you did." "I'm going in," she said, "not alone," Dax said immediately. "I'm suiting up right now." Brant's suiting up. Yara's already suited," Yara said from somewhere in the background of the comm. Voss looked at the opening. The low tone was still playing, slow and steady. The blue-gray light inside breathed its regular rhythm. "Hurry up," she said. Dak, Brant, and Yara were outside in 4 minutes. Marcus stayed with the ship, which was his preference, and also Voss's order. If something went wrong inside, she needed someone competent at the controls of the Resolute immediately. Rin was on the bridge. The other crew members were on standby. The 4 of them approached the opening in the hull together. Up close, the passage inside was wide enough for 2 people shoulder to shoulder. The walls were the same dark metal as the exterior, but inside the light changed. The blue-gray glow came from lines running along the walls at approximately shoulder height, thin lines of light embedded in the metal that pulsed in a slow, consistent rhythm. The light was enough to see by, not comfortable, enough. The passage went straight inward for about 20 meters and then curved. Brant had a scanner in his left hand and his right hand was at the empty holster where his sidearm usually sat. Voss had made them all leave their weapons on the ship. He had not argued about it for very long, but his hand kept drifting back to the holster anyway, which was muscle memory rather than intention. "Temperature inside is 21 degrees, Dax said quietly, reading his scanner. "Atmosphere matches breathable standard with intolerance. Gravity approximately 0.9 of standard." He paused. "These readings are identical to what the Sorn probe sent back. Everything matches." "Something maintained all this," Yara said. "For 400 years. The atmosphere, the gravity, the temperature." She was looking at the light lines in the walls as she walked. "Something has been keeping this place ready." "Ready for what?" Brant said. Nobody answered. They walked to where the passage curved and turned the corner, and stopped. The passage opened into a chamber so large that the far wall was not visible. The blue-gray light lines continued along the walls and ceiling, but here they branched and spread, multiplied across the ceiling in patterns that were clearly not random. Geometric, structured, repeating in ways that just barely stopped short of looking like something specific. The floor was flat and smooth and extended further than their lights could reach. From the center of the chamber, 4 large corridors branched off in different directions, going deeper into the ship. And from somewhere inside, from somewhere beyond all 4 of those corridors, there was a sound, low, very low, below comfortable hearing range, felt more than heard, a vibration in the chest and the bones. It was the same sound the hull had made under Voss's palm. The same quality, the same rhythm. Brant turned slowly, scanning in all directions. "Nothing on motion sensors," he said quietly. "Nothing reading as biological. Nothing reading as weapons systems or charged emitters or anything I recognize, actually. Scanners picking up a lot of energy readings, but nothing that categorizes into a known type." "The ship is active," Dax said. "Something's running in here. A lot of things." Voss stood in the center of the chamber and looked at the 4 corridors and felt, with a certainty she could not explain and did not try to, that the ship was doing the same thing she was. Looking back, deciding something. "It let us in," Yara said. Yes, Voss said. Every other species, it killed them outside. It never let them in at all. Yes, Voss said. Yara turned to look at her. In the dim blue-gray light, her dark eyes were very steady. So what's different about us? Voss looked at the 4 corridors going into the dark heart of the ship. I don't know yet, she said. But I think we're about to find out. She picked the leftmost corridor and walked toward it, and after a brief pause, the kind of pause people make when they take a breath before something they can't take back, the others followed her. Behind them, the hull opening remained exactly as it was. It did not close. It was waiting for them to come back. The corridor was long, and it did not stay straight. It curved slowly, almost too slowly to notice at first. Voss walked with her scanner up and her flashlight adding hard white edges to the blue-gray glow of the wall lines. The corridor went left, then leveled, then went slightly down. The ceiling was higher than it needed to be, high enough for something larger than a human, or for something that wanted open space above it. The walls were covered in the same overlapping plate design as the exterior, but here, the plates were smaller, the pattern finer, and the markings were denser. Lines and shapes and characters that looked like the text that had appeared on the Resolute's displays, repeated in sections, different in others, running floor to ceiling in columns like a library built into the walls. Same script, Dax said, scanning the walls as he walked. Same characters as the transmission we received. It sent us its language, Yara said. Or part of it, Dax said. Or a greeting. Or its name. We don't know what we received. It sent us something, Yara said. Before we even got here, it sent us something while we were still on the Resolute. Voss kept walking. The floor beneath her boots was solid and seamless, the same dark metal, and it transmitted the low vibration that was still going. Deeper in the ship, something pulsed at that same steady rhythm. She had stopped calling it a sound in her head and started thinking of it as a heartbeat, though she was careful not to say that out loud because she was the captain, and she needed the crew to follow facts, not her metaphors. The corridor opened into a smaller chamber, not vast like the first one. This was more like a large room, 20 meters across, with a ceiling 10 meters high and walls that curved inward at the top to meet in a single point. In the center of the room was a structure, not a machine, not exactly, more like a raised platform, roughly hexagonal, about a meter high. The top of it was flat, and on the flat surface, arranged with a precision that made them all slow down and look, were objects, 17 objects. Spread across the platform surface, some touching, some apart, each one different. Some were clearly technological, components, devices, pieces of equipment. Others looked geological, samples of rock or mineral. One appeared to be a container, sealed, with markings on it. One was small and dark and looked, from a certain angle, organic. Brant scanned them from the entrance to the room. Not explosive, not charged. No active energy outputs. They're just sitting there. Each one's from a different species, Dax said, moving closer. He was photographing everything. I recognize some of these. This material composition is consistent with Dresden manufacturing. This one is Sorn Collective Tech. I've seen this type in reference databases. He straightened up slowly. These are from every expedition that came here. The room was quiet. They tried to take things, Voss said. The Cathari, the Dresden. They came here to claim the ship. The ship took something from them instead. It keeps records, Yara said. She was standing at the edge of the platform looking at the objects without touching anything. These are its records, proof that they were here. The hand-shaped scorch mark on the hull, Voss said. It didn't come from the Dresden team burning through the hull. It came from the other side. From in here, the ship reached out and left a mark. Why? Brant said. Because something was there, Voss said. It leaves a record when something comes. She looked at the platform, 17 objects, at least 17 species, all dead. She looked at the empty space on the platform surface. There was room for more. Nobody said what they were all thinking. Keep moving, Voss said. They went deeper. The corridors branched and connected, a system more like a living thing's internal structure than like the layout of a ship built for practical purposes. There was no obvious logic to where things were. No clear separation of engineering sections from crew sections from storage. Everything was continuous, connected, the wall markings unbroken, the light lines never stopping. The vibration got stronger the further in they went, not threatening, just present. Like the ship was breathing harder, the deeper they went, or breathing with more intent. Yara stopped in a side passage and said, in here, the room she found was small, the smallest they had encountered. The walls were covered floor to ceiling in the script, more densely written than anywhere else. Column after column of it, and in the center of the room, suspended from the ceiling by thin cables of the same dark metal, was something that looked, more than anything else, like a map. It was a sphere roughly 2 meters across, The surface of it moved. Not quickly, not mechanically. It shifted slowly, sections of it sliding over other sections in the way that tectonic plates move, except that the patterns on the surface were clearly positional data. Stars, systems, regions of space. Voss recognized the Rallon cluster. She recognized the inner systems, the core worlds, the mapped zone. She recognized features of the galaxies she had been navigating for 12 years. And she recognized that the map showed things that were not on any human chart. Regions beyond the outer boundary of explored space. Systems that no surveying mission had ever reached. A vast section of the galaxy that was marked differently from the rest. Covered in a dense pattern of the ship's script, detailed and thorough, as if the ship had been there, had studied it all, had recorded everything. This ship has been further than we have, Dax said very quietly. He was pointing at a section of the map that was so far from known space that it had no reference points at all, just the ship's own markings and notation. A lot further, Voss said. The sphere continued to shift, its patterns rearranging slowly in an endless geological meditation. It wasn't displaying for them, specifically. It was doing what it always did. They were just there to see it. Yara was looking at the script on the walls. She had been silent for a while, which Voss had learned meant she was assembling something in her head. It's been alone for a long time, she said. This ship has been here for 400 years, and before that it was out there. She gestured at the far reaches of the map. For however long it was traveling, alone, studying, waiting. Waiting for what? Brandt said. It was the same question he had asked at the entrance to the first chamber. He asked things twice sometimes. It was how his thinking worked. He asked a question to open it, and then he asked it again when he actually wanted an answer. Nobody answered him this time either. But this time the silence was different, more thoughtful, less a failure to answer and more a choosing to sit with the question. They left the map room and kept going. 2 hours in, the ship started testing them. Voss would not call it that at first. She would call it malfunction, environmental anomaly, coincidence. But by the fourth event, she stopped arguing with herself about what to call it. The first event was the floor. A section of the corridor floor ahead of them simply disappeared. One moment it was there, solid and dark and continuous. Then it was not. A gap, roughly 2 meters across, dropped away into something deep and dark below, the bottom not visible on their lights. The wall markings on the edges of the gap were dense, as if the text had been building toward this point. Brandt scanned the gap. 15 meters down, a hard surface, nothing else. Brandt looked at the gap. He looked at the other side where the corridor continued. He looked at Voss. Voss looked at the gap. She took a running step and jumped across it. She landed on the other side cleanly, stumbled one step, caught herself. She turned around. On her side of the gap, the wall markings were continuing to shift, scrolling slowly, as if something was updating them. One by one, Dak, Yara, and then Brandt jumped across. Brandt made a quiet sound of personal objection when he landed but said nothing else. They kept moving. 40 meters further, the light lines in the walls went out. Complete darkness. Their flashlights came on automatically, which was the designed response. But in the sudden shift from that blue-gray glow to hard white beams, the corridor felt different, smaller. The sounds of the ship more present, the vibration in the floor more noticeable. They had been in the dark for approximately 90 seconds when Yara said, "Wait." They stopped. "The lights didn't go out," she said. "The spectrum changed. Look at your light beams. What's reflecting?" Voss looked. In her flashlight beam, the walls showed something the blue-gray light had not shown. The script markings on the walls were three-dimensional. Not just engraved into the surface but raised, layered, with depth and shadow that the even ambient light had completely erased. In the directional beam they looked completely different, more like structures than inscriptions, more like a physical record than written language. "It made us look," Yara said. "It changed the light to make us look at this differently," Dak said. He was already photographing everything, capturing the directional shadows, the three-dimensional depth of the markings. The lights came back on after 12 more seconds. The third event was the vibration. It stopped. Between one breath and the next, the constant low pulse that had been running through the ship since they entered, that steady rhythm that Voss had stopped calling a sound and started thinking of as a heartbeat, simply ceased. The silence it left was so complete that all four of them stopped walking at the same moment. Nobody gave an order. They just all stopped and stood in the sudden quiet and felt it. 12 seconds of absolute silence, then the vibration returned, but not the same rhythm, slower now, longer between pulses, as if whatever generated it had made one adjustment and settled into a different pattern, as if it had been watching them notice the silence and had decided something based on how they stood in it. Voss looked at Dak. Dak looked at Voss, he said very quietly. It's calibrating. Calibrating to what? Brant said. To us, Voss said. The fourth event was the one that removed all doubt. They had found a large secondary chamber, roughly 3 kilometers into the ship. It was different from the entrance chamber. This one had structures in it. Not furniture, nothing recognizable as furniture, but forms that rose from the floor in arrangements that suggested use, without revealing what use. Columns, surfaces, recesses in the walls at varying heights. The light lines were brighter in here. The script on the walls was different. Not the scrolling columns from the corridors, but something more like images. Shapes that were almost but not quite representational, like abstract pictures of things, rather than pictures of the things themselves. In the center of this chamber, the floor had a different texture, smoother, darker, and it was warm. Warmer than the surrounding floor, warmer than the walls. The specific warmth that Voss had felt on the outside hull, coming from inside, that warmth was here, generated from directly underfoot. She stood on the warm section of floor and looked up at the ceiling. Above her, set into the highest point of the chamber ceiling, was something she had not seen anywhere else in the ship. It was a circle, roughly 3 meters across, of a different material than the surrounding metal. Not dark, not blue-gray. Pale, almost white, luminescent on its own without any light lines feeding it. It glowed with a steady, even light that was warmer in color than the rest of the ship. Something closer to the yellow-white of a star than the cool blue of the wall lines. And it was looking at her. Not metaphorically. Not in the way people said, the Mona Lisa looked at you wherever you stood. The circle was oriented toward her. When she took 3 steps to the left, the orientation shifted. Not the whole circle, but a subtle change in the quality of the light, in where the intensity was focused, to track her movement. When she stopped, it stopped. When Dak walked across the warm floor section, it moved to follow him. When Yara sat down on the floor, it settled its attention on Yara and stayed there. Brant stood off to the side on the regular floor and watched all of this. He said, "It's looking at us." "Yes," Voss said. "The ship is watching us," he said, making sure the idea was fully stated, fully out in the open where everyone could look at it directly. "Yes," Voss said. "It has been this whole time," Yara said. She was still sitting on the floor. She had pulled her knees up and was looking at the glowing circle above her, without any fear in her face. Something else was there instead, the expressions of someone who has just understood something that they had been circling for a while. The floor gap, the lights going out, the rhythm changing. It wasn't testing whether we could handle obstacles. She paused. It was watching how we handled obstacles, how we thought, how we talked to each other, what we prioritized. It was watching to see what we are, Dak said. Voss looked at the circle above her. It moved very slightly, tracking her. "Then let it watch," she said. She reached into her kit and pulled out the small handheld camera she always carried on survey jobs. A habit from 10 years of documentation work, nothing special about it. She held it up and pointed it at the glowing circle. She took a picture of it. The circle pulsed once, a single bright flash, quick and clean like a shutter closing. The same light, the same warmth, but deliberate, intentional. It took a picture back. Brant made a sound that was almost a laugh, almost. Did it take our picture? "Yes," Yara said, and she was smiling, the first real smile any of them had smiled since boarding the ship. "I think it did." The chamber was quiet except for the low returning pulse of the ship's rhythm, steady and slow. The glowing circle above them held its warmth. And somewhere deep in the ship, further in than they had yet gone, past more corridors and chambers and things they hadn't seen, something that had been waiting for a very long time was doing something that, if it had a face, might have looked like relief. They stayed in the chamber for another hour. They didn't rush. They walked the edges of the room and looked at the structures and photographed everything. And Dak spoke into his recorder, and Yara wrote notes on her scanner screen. And Brant sat down on the warm floor section, with his back against one of the column structures, and ate a protein bar from his suit pocket with total composure, as if sitting inside an ancient and possibly conscious alien ship eating a snack was a perfectly reasonable thing to be doing. The glowing circle above him watched him eat with what Voss, for the rest of her life, would describe as curiosity. They made their way back to the entrance, past the map room and the record platform and the dark metal corridors, and they went back out through the opening in the hull that was still exactly as they had left it, still breathing its slow tone, still waiting for them. Voss was last. She turned in the opening and looked back at the blue-gray dark inside. "We'll be back," she said. She did not say it to her crew, she said it to the ship. The tone from the opening changed pitch, just slightly, just for a moment, then settled back. Voss had been on enough survey jobs to know when a communication was minimal and still complete. She went back to the Resolute and started planning for tomorrow. That night, 14 alien species long-range probes tracked the Resolute sitting stationary against the hull of the Condemned and tried to make sense of the sensor data they were recording. Representatives from 6 galactic governments received reports from their monitoring teams. 3 emergency council sessions were convened in the space of 4 hours. A great deal was said in many languages by many senior officials about what the humans were doing, and what it might mean and what should be done about it. None of them had any answers. None of them had good ideas. All of them were, in their various ways, afraid. On the Resolute, Marcus Webb was in his engine room, running diagnostics on a system that was still running at 12% above standard efficiency with no explanation, and humming to himself and thinking. On the bridge, Rin Chen was monitoring the probe signals tracking them and writing a very calm and thorough report about what she was seeing and what she thought it meant. In the common room, Voss was at the table with a mug of tea and all of Dak's recordings from inside the ship and the translation database running its comparison work, 3 hours into a process that the system estimated might take 3 days. She was not waiting on the database. She was thinking about the glow, the warmth, the picture it had taken of them, the way the rhythm of the ship had changed after they sat in that silence together. Calibrating, Dak had said. She turned the word over in her mind. Something that had been waiting for 400 years, that had turned away every species that had come to it with force or with agenda, was calibrating to 11 humans on a 60-meter survey ship with no plan, no weapons active, and a protein bar eaten in its central chamber. She looked at her tea. Tomorrow she was going back in. Deeper this time, all the way to wherever that pulse was coming from. She had the feeling it was expecting her. They went back the next morning with 6 people instead of 4. Voss brought Marcus, because she needed someone who could look at technology and understand what it was doing, even when the technology was nothing he had ever seen before. She brought Nadia Pett, who was the ship's communications specialist and the quietest person on the crew, and she had a theory about Nadia that she hadn't put into words yet. She brought Leon Hargrove, who was crew maintenance, and who had a specific ability to stay completely calm in situations that should not be calm, which was a talent she trusted. And she brought Rin, which meant leaving Dak on the Resolute as acting captain, which Dak accepted with the expression of a man who knows he drew the short straw, but also knows why. If something goes wrong in there, Dak told her before she suited up, I need to know about it immediately. You'll know, she said. How? Because the monitors will stop getting our signals, she said. Which is when you take the ship out of range and contact the council. And do what? Dak said. Tell them we got further than anyone else, she said. Tell them it didn't kill us. Tell them the ship breathes. She checked her suit seals. That'll be enough to keep people working on this for another 100 years. That's not nothing. Dak looked at her. You're not planning to come back out, are you? Not today. Not until you find whatever's at the center of it. I'm planning to come back out, she said. I'm just not planning around the possibility that I won't. She picked up her kit. There's a difference. They went back through the entrance, past the record platform and the map room, through the corridors with their dense writing, and this time they took the rightmost of the 4 main corridors branching from the first chamber, the one they hadn't explored yet. Voss had chosen it deliberately. If the ship had been watching them yesterday, she wanted today to look like a choice, like curiosity, like the kind of purposeful not following the same path that distinguished exploration from following instructions. The corridor was different from the one they had taken before, wider, the ceiling higher. The script on the walls less dense but different in character, larger marks, spaced differently, with sections that looked almost like numbered sequences, diagrams, possibly, instructions, possibly. The corridor was also warmer, and as they went deeper, the warmth increased gradually, building in small steps rather than arriving all at once. Marcus walked with his scanner in one hand, and his other hand trailing along the wall, not quite touching the marked surface. He did this for about 10 minutes before Voss asked him what he was doing. Feeling for vibration changes, he said. There are subsystems running in these walls. Energy conduction, I think, though not in any configuration I've seen before. Something is moving through the walls, not electricity, not heat transfer, not anything I can categorize cleanly. He lifted his hand and looked at it, but the distribution pattern is consistent, regular, like it has a purpose and it's doing it very reliably. What kind of purpose? Yara asked. She had come again, and she had spent the first 15 minutes of their walk photographing the wall script at every different angle her suit could manage. Maintenance, Marcus said, or communication, or both at the same time. The two might not be separate functions here. He dropped his hand and kept walking. This ship maintains itself, he said. The atmosphere, the gravity, the temperature, the lights that come on. Something in these walls is doing all of that continuously, without stopping, for however long this ship has been operating. 400 years at minimum, Nadia said from behind them. She said it simply, as a fact, and said nothing else, which was consistent with how she communicated generally. Exactly the required number of words and then silence. A lot longer than that, Marcus said. The probe data suggested the internal systems showed age consistent with several thousand years of continuous operation, at minimum. He paused. This thing is old. They walked in silence for a moment, carrying that idea. The corridor ended in a room that was not like anything they had found the day before. It was large. Not as large as the main entrance chamber, but large enough that when they walked into it, the first thing everyone felt was the ceiling being higher than it needed to be. The room was circular, and the floor, unlike the corridor, was not a flat continuous surface. It had levels. Concentric rings stepped down from the outer edge toward the center, like an amphitheater, each level about half a meter lower than the one outside it, with the lowest point, the center, roughly 3 meters below the entrance level. At the center, filling the lowest ring, was a pool. Not water, not any liquid any of them could identify on sight. It was dark as the hull metal, which shouldn't have been possible for a liquid, and perfectly still, and it gave off a faint light from somewhere below its surface, deep blue, regular as the pulse of the ship. The pool was roughly 5 meters across. Around its edge, the floor had markings, not the script from the walls, something different. Symbols arranged in a ring, evenly spaced, each one unique. Yara counted them, moving her light slowly around the ring. 17, she said. Nobody moved for a moment. 17 species, Voss said. Same number as the objects on the collection platform. They're symbols, Nadia said. Voss moved to the first step and started down toward the center. The warmth increased as she descended. At the bottom, standing at the edge of the pool, the low vibration of the ship was strong enough to feel in her chest, in her teeth. Not painful, not overwhelming, just deeply present, like standing too close to a large speaker. She looked at the 17 symbols. She looked at the pool. On the ring of symbols there was a gap. Between two of the symbols, the gap was roughly the same width as the others, as if it was a space waiting to be filled. An 18th symbol that hadn't been placed yet. Marcus came down and stood beside her. He scanned the pool surface carefully. He ran the scan twice and read the results and said, "It's not a liquid." "What is it?" Voss said. "Don't know," Marcus said. "It's registering as matter, but the type doesn't match any material in my database. It's not organic, not mineral, not metallic. It's registering as something the scanner can't categorize." He looked up. "But it's connected to the walls, the same energy I've been feeling in the walls. It's concentrated here. All of it is feeding into this." "It's the source," Voss said. "Or a node," Marcus said, "a junction, something." Nadia was walking the ring, photographing each symbol. She stopped at the gap. She stood there for a long time, not speaking, looking at the empty space between the two flanking symbols. Then she crouched down and, with her gloved finger, drew a slow, simple line in the thin layer of dark particulate that had settled on the floor at the pool's edge. Just a line, testing the surface, looking at how it responded. The pool surface moved, not much, a single ripple, starting from the center and moving outward, reaching the edge of the pool and then reversing, folding back inward, and when it reached center again, it disappeared into the stillness. One ripple, in response to one mark drawn near the edge by one human finger. Nadia sat back on her heels and looked at the pool. In her quiet way, she said, "It knows we're at the edge of it." "Yes," Voss said. "It's been waiting for us to come to this room," Nadia said. "Everything else was a corridor." "What is this room?" Leon Hargrove said. He had been standing at the second ring, one level up, saying nothing, watching everything. He was the kind of person who needed to see a complete picture before he said anything about it, and he had been building his picture since they walked in. Voss looked at the pool, at the 17 symbols, at the gap between them. She thought about all of it, the record platform, the map sphere, the glowing circle that took their picture, the rhythm that changed. Every observation they had made, every choice the ship had made in their presence. "I think it's where it talks," Voss said. "When it decides to talk, it hasn't decided yet," Leon said. "I don't think so," Voss said. "I think we're still." She stopped. She was going to say still being evaluated, and she stopped because the word evaluation felt wrong for what was happening. Evaluation implied an authority passing judgment on a lesser party. That wasn't what this felt like. "It's still deciding if it wants to," Nadia said, filling in the pause. "Not whether we're good enough. Whether it wants to." The pool was still. Voss thought about that for a long moment. about a ship that had been here for 400 years, which had been out in the unmapped dark for thousands of years before that, which had watched species come and bring their weapons and their tools and their agendas and die. All of them. Every time, without exception. She thought about what it might feel like to wait that long. She sat down on the lowest ring, facing the pool, and stayed there. Marcus, meanwhile, had gone back up 2 levels and found something in the wall that he could not stop looking at. A panel, recessed slightly, the same plate metal design as everything else, but with a small rectangular section that was different. The markings on it arranged differently, more regular, in a pattern that Marcus's 47 years of looking at mechanical systems recognized without being able to say exactly why. He looked at it for a while. He got out his small multi-tool. He looked at it some more. He put the multi-tool away. He looked at the panel again with just his eyes and his experience, and the accumulated knowledge of a career spent understanding how power moved through systems. He went down to Voss. "There's a panel up there," he said quietly. "I think it's a control interface of some kind." "Don't touch it," Voss said. "I know," Marcus said. "But if I'm reading it right." He paused, choosing his words. "If I'm reading it right, it's not in its standard operating state. Something in the system is running below capacity, not a failure, a deliberate reduction. Like it's conserving something. What something?" "Energy, maybe," Marcus said. "Or attention." He paused. "Like when you turn a heavy system into standby mode, because you're waiting, and you don't need to run at full power for waiting. But you're ready to." Voss looked at the pool, at the still dark surface. "How long do you think it's been in standby?" she asked. Marcus looked at the walls. At the density and age of the markings, the worn and layered quality of the plates, the things that spoke of enormous time passed. "A long time," he said. "A very long time." Voss nodded slowly. She thought about Yara's words from yesterday. It's been alone for a long time. They had been in the amphitheater room for almost 3 hours when Nadia did something that none of them had planned. She started talking, not to them. She was sitting on the bottom ring, 3 meters from Voss, facing the pool, and she started talking in a low and even voice about what she was seeing. Not analyzing it, not reporting it, just describing it. The color of the pool, the way the symbols were carved, the weight of the air in the room, the quality of the warmth. She spoke carefully and without rushing. The way she spoke when she was doing something she believed in. And she talked for about 4 minutes straight before she stopped. The pool rippled. Not one ripple this time. Several, overlapping, spreading outward from the center, and returning, intersecting, creating a surface that for about 10 seconds was in constant subtle motion before settling back to stillness. Everyone in the room was completely still. "It heard you," Yara said very quietly. "I wasn't asking it anything," Nadia said. "I wasn't asking it to do anything. I was just describing what I see." "What do you mean?" Brandt said from up on the 3rd ring. "Every species that came here wanted something," Nadia said. "The Drazen wanted data. The Cathari wanted to take it. The Velhari wanted acknowledgement, recognition. The Sorn probes were here to collect and report. Every contact was transactional. Every species showed up with a need and tried to get the ship to meet it." She looked at the pool. "I wasn't asking it for anything. I was just talking to it." The pool was still. But something about the stillness was different now. Denser. More present. Like the difference between an empty room and a room with someone standing quiet in it. Voss watched the surface of the pool. She said to it directly, "We don't know who built you. No ripple. We don't know what you are. No ripple. We can't read your language. We can't categorize your material. We don't understand most of what we've seen in here." She paused. "We're going to come back tomorrow, and the day after. We're going to keep coming back until we figure out how to talk to each other properly. Or until you tell us to leave. And if you tell us to leave, we'll leave." She looked at the surface of the pool. "We're not here to take anything." The pool was still. Then from somewhere above them, from the ceiling, from the walls, from everywhere at once, the ship's rhythm changed, not stopped, changed. The steady pulse that had been running through the metal since they first touched the hull shifted. It slowed. It deepened. It became something longer and lower and more deliberate. And in the change there was something that Voss could not name clinically and would not try to. It felt like a door being opened. Not a physical door. Something else. Something larger. The glowing circle that had watched them in the main chamber 2 days ago. The pale white circle set into the ceiling. That same quality of light appeared now in this room. Not from a point in the ceiling. From the pool itself. The dark surface began to glow from beneath. That warm pale light rising through whatever the dark material was. And the pool lit up slowly and steadily until the whole room was different. Marcus looked at his scanner. He looked at the readings. He looked at the scanner again, with the specific expression of a man who does not distrust his equipment but wishes he could. Energy output just increased by a significant factor, he said. The whole ship, not just this room. Every subsystem I've been monitoring in these walls. They all went up simultaneously. He lowered the scanner. It's not in standby anymore. The warm light from the pool filled the amphitheater room. And then from the pool surface, from the light inside it, something moved, not a ripple, not a wave, a form, gradual and deliberate, rising from the surface the way a shape emerges from fog when you drive toward it, gaining definition as it rises, becoming distinct, becoming specific. It had no color. It was made of the same pale light as the pool itself. It was not biological in its shape, not the shape of any species they knew, but it had dimension and structure, and it was oriented toward them. It stopped rising when it reached approximately 2 meters tall. It waited. Everyone in the room was perfectly still. Voss stood up from where she had been sitting. She stood at the edge of the pool, facing the light form directly, and she said, "Hello." The form moved. The light within it shifted, patterns flowing through it from base to apex, complex and rapid, lasting about 5 seconds. Then it was still again. "We can't read that yet," Voss said. "We'll learn." "We want to learn." She paused. "My name is Elena Voss. This is my ship. We're from a planet called Earth in the inner systems. We've been traveling in space for about 100 years. A pause. "You've been traveling a lot longer than that." The form was still. Nadia said quietly, "Ask it what it wants." Voss looked at the form, at the pale light that shifted slowly within it, patient and old and waiting. "What are you looking for?" she said. The form was still for a long moment. Then the light within it moved again. Not a rapid, complex pattern this time. Slow, simple. One motion starting at the base of the form and rising to the top. A single upward movement. Rising. Going somewhere. Voss stood at the edge of the pool in the warm light, in the deep pulse of the ship's new rhythm. And she looked at the form made of light, and she understood. It was not looking for something. It was going somewhere. And it had been looking for a very long time for someone to go with. It took 9 days. 9 days of going back in, every morning, sometimes all 6 of them, sometimes just Voss and Nadia, once Voss alone for 4 hours, while the rest of the crew watched on monitors, and Dak sat in the captain's chair of the Resolute, and did not eat lunch. 9 days of sitting in the amphitheater room with the pool, communicating in the only language they had available at first, gesture and proximity and patience, and the slow, accumulated trust of showing up every day without weapons and without demands. The translation database came through on day 3. Not a full translation. The ship's language was unlike anything in the Council's archives, which meant it hadn't been spoken or written by any species the galactic community had ever encountered. But the database found structural patterns, grammatical logic, the architecture of a language. And that was enough for Nadia to start building a bridge. She worked on it for 6 hours a day in a corner of the bridge, cross-referencing the ship's script against every known linguistic root, building a framework that was mostly guesswork at first, and became less so the longer she worked. The ship helped. Not consciously at first, but the light form in the pool began responding to their attempts differently as the days went on. When Nadia said a word from the ship's script and paired it with an action, standing up when she said what she believed meant rise, placing her hand against the wall when she said what she believed meant surface, the light form would either hold still or produce a ripple from the pool. Still meant she had it wrong. The ripple meant she was close. It was the most basic form of communication possible. 2 parties pointing at things and making sounds, and it was the most important work any human being had done in the history of the species, without knowing it at the time. By day 5 they had 30 words, by day 7 80, by day 9 enough. On day 9 Voss sat alone in the amphitheater room. The rest of the crew was on the Resolute. She had asked them to stay there for this, not because she didn't trust them, because she had spent 9 days watching the light form in the pool, learning to read the small shifts in it, the way you learn to read a person's expression after time with them, and she had a clear sense that the next conversation would be long and would require space. She sat on the bottom ring, at the edge of the pool, and the light form rose from the surface, and it looked at her with whatever it had that served as looking, and she said, in the 30 words she had learned and the 70 gestures and the rough framework of a communication that was more feeling than language, "Tell me what you are." The pool surface moved. The light form held still. Then, slowly, something happened that hadn't happened before. The room changed, not physically. The walls, the floor, the ceiling, all unchanged. But the light from the pool spread, expanded, rose up the walls. And in the light, the script on the walls transformed. Not the characters themselves, which were carved in metal, but the light moved through them in a sequence. illuminating specific sections in a specific order, and in the order there was meaning. Nadia had been right that it was a library, more than a library, a record of something, a record of everything. The light showed her what she had thought were diagrams in the corridor walls. They were not diagrams. They were maps of a different kind, not geographic but temporal. A record of a long journey, stars encountered, systems studied, a path through the galaxy over an enormous period of time, marked in sequence, each mark a place that had been visited and learned, and at the beginning of the record, at the earliest point in the sequence, marked differently from everything else, with a kind of emphasis that felt like weight, was an image of something she had no words for, a place, a point, a beginning point, before the journey, before the thousands of years of travel, a place that was not in this galaxy. Voss looked at it. She looked at the light form. She said the word she had for origin, for home, for where from. She pointed at the image at the beginning of the sequence. The light form was still for a long moment. Then the pool sent a single ripple outward. Yes, Voss sat with that for a moment. This ship, this old, patient, devastating ship, had come from somewhere else entirely, had traveled across galactic distances in a timescale she couldn't fully absorb, had arrived here, in this galaxy, and spent thousands of years studying it, crossing it, mapping its edges and its dark inner regions and everything in between, alone. Why did you stay in the cluster, she said. Why stop here in this place for 400 years? The light form moved, the pool rippled in a complex pattern. She couldn't read all of it, not yet, but she caught a word she knew. She had learned it on day 4, a word that meant looking but not passive looking. Active looking. Searching, and another word, a word for completeness. For the thing that makes a thing whole that was not whole before. She thought about the record platform with 17 objects from 17 dead species. She thought about the empty space on the ring of symbols at the pool's edge, waiting for an 18th. She thought about what Marcus had said. It's been in standby mode, waiting, conserving for what it knew was coming. You killed them, she said. The light form was completely still. The Drezon, the Cathari, all of them. She was not afraid saying this. She had asked it 9 days into trust. Why? The pool moved. Words she recognized. A word for intrusion that was also a word for harm. A word for continuation that meant something like survival. A word she had learned for something she could only translate roughly as integrity. Not morality, but physical wholeness, structural completeness. And a word she had not heard before. A new one. Used twice, with weight. She looked at it and thought about it and felt around the edges of its meaning, and eventually she said, Test. You were testing them. The pool rippled. Not to see if they were strong enough, she said. Not to see if they were smart enough. She looked at the light form. You were to testing what they would do when they couldn't have something they wanted, still, which in their language now meant keep going. Every species that came here wanted to own you, she said. They brought tools, they brought force, they brought arguments, they came to claim you. And you read what they came with, and you stopped them. Because what they were was something you already knew. Something that doesn't work for what you need. A ripple. She sat with the words she'd been turning over. Not strength, not intelligence, not civilization or age or technological advancement. Something else. Something harder to define. What did we have, she said. When we came here, when I put my hand on the hull and you opened the door, what was different? The light form moved for a long time. The pool sent complex ripples. Words she recognized, words she didn't, and in between them something that wasn't words at all. A quality of light. A warmth change, a depth shift that she had come to understand over 9 days as the equivalent of tone of voice. Of emotion, maybe. Of something that was as close to emotion as this ancient thing could express. She caught words for smallness, which in context meant young. Words for chaos, which in context meant unpredictable. A word for collision, which in context meant encounter. A word she had not heard before that repeated 3 times. She said it back. She asked what it meant. The pool held still. The light form moved to the edge of the pool closest to her. The warmth in the room increased. The ship's pulse, that deep vibration in the metal floor and walls and everywhere, changed its rhythm again, slowed further, became something more like one long breath being held and then slowly released. The new word, repeated 3 times, never explained. She sat with it. She tried every translation angle Nadia had taught her. She looked at its component sounds, its structural position in the sentences that had contained it. She thought about what it had been describing when it was used. The context each time. The 3rd time it had been used. It had been in a sentence that also used the word she'd learned for species or people. The 4th word of that sentence was one she recognized as the closest thing the ship's language had to a partner, or a crew. A crew. She sat at the edge of the pool for a long time. Then she said, "You want to go on." The pool moved, not a ripple. A wave, a real movement, full surface, every part of the pool moving at once. "Yes, you've been mapping this galaxy," she said, "for thousands of years. And you're done, you've seen it. And you want to go further. Past the edge of the mapped zone, past everything we know, somewhere out there." She pointed, up and outward, the direction of beyond, the direction of the unmapped dark at the edge of the galaxy. "And you can't do that alone." The pool was still. "Why can't you do it alone?" Voss said. "You've been alone for thousands of years." The light form moved. Words she recognized. And the new word again, one more time, and this time it was followed by one she definitely knew. One she had learned early because it appeared constantly throughout the ship's writing, throughout every conversation. A word that she had thought at first meant simply broken. It didn't mean broken. It meant lonely. Voss sat at the edge of the pool in the warm light and the deep pulse of an ancient ship that had traveled further than she could imagine, and mapped more than her entire civilization had ever found, and came from somewhere that was not even this galaxy and had been alone for all of it. And she said nothing for a while. Then she said, "I need to call my crew." She went back to the Resolute and gathered them in the main bay, all 11 of them, and she told them everything, all of it. She used Nadia's word lists and her own best attempts to translate what she had understood and where the gaps were, and she was honest about the gaps, and she was honest about the risk, and honest about the scale of what was being asked, and honest about the fact that she was going to say yes, personally, today, right now, and that nobody was required to say yes with her. Silence, the good kind, the thinking kind. Yara said, "How far?" "I don't know," Voss said. "Past everything we've mapped, past everything any species has mapped. Into dark we've never seen." "For how long?" Rin said. Voss said, "Are we coming back?" Brandt said. Voss looked at him. "I don't know." More silence. Marcus leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms and looked at the ceiling of the main bay for a while. Then he looked at Voss and said, "It can't do it alone." "No," Voss said. "Needs a crew," he said. "Yes, picked us specifically," he said. "Out of everyone, all the species in the galaxy, hundreds of years of trying. Picked 11 humans on a survey ship." "Yes," Voss said. Marcus uncrossed his arms. "Then we'd be complete idiots to say no," he said. Nadia said, "Yes, one word, no elaboration." Rin said, "I'm the best pilot you have." "Leon, I fixed the forward sensor array 3 times last month. It'll need me." One by one, all 11 of them said yes. Some quickly, some after long silence. Brandt last, who looked at the wall for almost a full minute and then said, "If we don't come back, do we get to name the ship?" "Yes," Voss said. "Good," Brandt said. "I've been thinking about names." He paused. "I'm going to need a minute." The galactic community found out over the next 24 hours. They found out because the 14 monitoring probes that had been tracking the Resolute went offline. One by one, the probe signals disappeared from the monitoring networks of 6 different governments. When the last one went silent, the data teams who had been watching the feeds around the clock called their senior officials with the news. The Resolute was no longer in the Rallen cluster. The Condemned, which was also no longer in the Rallen cluster, was no longer in any position the long-range scanning networks could detect. Both ships were gone. The Galactic Council convened a full emergency session within 3 hours. Representatives from 14 species were present. The meeting lasted 11 hours. It covered the implications, the precedents, the gaps in understanding, the danger. It covered what humanity had done that no other species had managed. It covered the possibility that the humans had been destroyed. A possibility that became less convincing the more they examined the probe data from the final hours, which showed not destruction but departure, not death but direction. Outward, toward the unmapped dark beyond the galaxy's edge. It covered the possibility that humanity had, in less than 2 weeks and with a mid-class survey ship and 11 crew members and no plan, become the crew of the most dangerous, most ancient, most powerful ship that any species in the known galaxy had ever encountered. The Vethari representative, whose people had called the ship the Mouth, sat in silence for the final 3 hours of the session and said nothing when others asked her views. When the session ended and the hall began to empty, she remained in her seat, looking at the last probe image captured before the signals cut out, a long-range photograph of the Condemned, its hull lit from within now with a warm pale light that it had never shown before in 400 years of monitoring, and beside it the small silhouette of the Resolute, close to its flank, 2 ships aligned. The image showed the 2 ships at the moment before they moved, before they went further than any probe could follow. She had thought, all her life, that the Mouth was a weapon. Her species had called it that for centuries, a dormant weapon, a deadly one. She had been wrong about what it was. She had been wrong about what it was waiting for. She had been wrong about humanity too. Every species had been. The humans were not the newest species in the galaxy because they had arrived late. They were new in a different sense. New in the way a thing is new when it is still finding out what it is. When it has not yet decided to be afraid of what it doesn't understand. When it will still sit in an ancient chamber and talk to the dark and eat a protein bar against a strange column and take a picture of something alien and wait for it to take one back. She looked at the image for a long time. Then she looked at the empty space in the star chart where the two ships had been. On the ship. On the Condemned, which now had a name that 11 humans had agreed on. A name they had painted in white letters on the inner wall of the entrance chamber in their own alphabet. Voss stood on the bridge. The bridge was not what she had expected. She had expected machinery, controls, instruments, the architecture of command that she understood from 20 years of working ships. What she found was a room at the forward apex of the vessel with a curved wall that was transparent. Not a window, not exactly, but a surface that showed the outside with complete clarity, that showed the stars ahead, and the dark between them and the edge of everything mapped and familiar falling away behind. The light form was here too, in a smaller version, rising from a point in the floor without a pool, just present, just available, just there. Nadia was at one section of the curved wall, building her dictionaries, her frameworks, her translation tools. Marcus was already in the walls of the ship, figuratively and almost literally, running his diagnostics and his tests, and developing an understanding of the engineering systems that no other human would have, and that he treated with the same quiet competence he brought to everything he'd ever worked on. Rin was in the pilot's position, which was not a chair and a console, but something more like a space that fit her and oriented to her and knew what she was doing when she did it, which she had tested for 3 hours, and declared acceptable with the restraint of someone who actually found it extraordinary. Brandt had gotten to name the ship. After 11 minutes of deliberation, which had involved him going back and forth on 4 different options while the rest of the crew waited with varying degrees of patience, he had announced the name. He picked it for no reason he could fully justify. He picked it because when he sat in the amphitheater room and looked at the pool and felt the pulse of the ship through the floor, it felt like something with direction, something that had been here and was going there and had not yet stopped. He picked it because of what Nadia had translated, the word for lonely, the word for going on, the word for the thing that makes a thing complete that was not complete before. He picked the name that felt like what the ship was actually doing. He called it the first step. The crew had been quiet for a moment after he said it. Then Voss had nodded once and Nadia had gone to get the white paint, and that was that. The first step moved toward the unmapped dark beyond the outer edge of the galaxy, carrying 11 humans and one ancient consciousness that had been waiting, for centuries, for millennia, for longer than human civilization had existed, for someone who would show up without a plan and sit in its chambers and talk to its dark and mean none of it as a threat. Someone who had not yet learned to be afraid of the things they didn't understand. Someone new enough to still be curious. Voss stood at the transparent wall and looked at the stars ahead, at the dark between them, which was vast and deep and unknown and full of things nobody had ever seen. At the edge of the mapped zone passing behind them, falling away, becoming just another starting point. The ship's pulse ran through the floor under her feet, steady and deep, not standby, not waiting. Full power, fully awake, fully in motion for the first time in a very long time. She put her hand flat against the transparent wall, the same gesture she had made against the hull at the beginning of all of this. Palm flat, patient, present. The wall was warm. Warm from the inside, from something alive on the other side. She kept her hand there, and she looked at the dark ahead, and she said nothing, because nothing needed saying. And, behind her, the 11 people who had decided to go somewhere nobody had ever been were getting to work. The first step went on.